Welcome to Chart Chat Live. I am Steve Wexler. This is our 10th installation of this. And I am Steve Wexler, the founder and principal of Data Revelations. Joining me are
Jeff Shaffer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at a company in Cincinnati, Ohio, and adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati.
Hi, I'm Amanda Makulec. I am the Data Visualization Lead at Excella here in Washington, D.C., and also the Operations Director for the Data Visualization Society.
And sadly not able to join us today is Andy Cotgrave, Chief Technical Evangelist and a fellow author on the Big Book of Dashboards. Hopefully he'll be able to join us at our next Chart Chat. And very briefly, the idea behind Chart Chat was to capture the debates, discussions, elucidations, enragements that went into writing the Big Book of Dashboards. I learned a ton from Jeff and Andy. I don't think our discussions were ever quite as confrontational as last night's Democratic debate and even this slide, which is over here. But, oh gosh, it was great. I just learned a ton, and just getting different opinions and enlightening me of different ways of looking at it. And we thought this might be valuable for others to get as well. So delighted to be doing this for the 10th time with Jeff. Delighted to be doing this for the second time with Amanda. And before we get into it, and I'll give you the agenda, Amanda has a celebration to celebrate.
So we are excited to share that today the Data Visualization Society turns 1. It's our birthday, and it's such a nice day to have it on Chart Chat and be able to celebrate it with you guys here. We have over 11,500 members now from 123 countries. The little graph in the lower left-hand corner shows that rapid increase back at the very beginning and the continued growth of the DVS over the last year. And we are so excited to have such a great group of members. If you're not already a member of the DVS, we hope you'll consider joining us to come continue these kind of debates and conversations on the DVS Slack and on Nightingale, our publication, and in a couple of spaces to come. So big plans for 2020. Thanks for celebrating with us.
And if time permits, we'll have a knockdown, drag-out fight about the use of packed bubbles over there.
Oh yeah, I know, I know, Steve. I knew I was going to get called out for that one, but we needed some creativity up in the corner to pack it all in one space.
Yoda. Okay.
He's going to give me a screaming cat before we even get to the agenda.
No, okay. So here is our agenda for the day, which is originally it was going to be lots of odd chart types, but there's so much interest and discussions of the chart. The chart of the month, which is Voronoi or Voronoi Diagrams. So we're going to spend some time on that. We're going to spend some time on long-form dashboards. We're going to have our lightning round and then some time for Q&A. From start to end, we should probably go about 45 minutes. And with that, Jeff, I'm going to stop sharing and hand things over to you.
Gonna share here. Just a confirmation that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Excellent. So Voronoi diagrams, I think it became chart of the year here is what I would say so far. We're seeing lots of it on Tableau Public in various forms. This is named after Georgy Fyodosovich Voronoi. I think we should bring the Y back maybe, but Russian mathematician, and he's really the namesake for the Voronoi diagrams. So what is a Voronoi diagram? I guess that that'd be a good place to start. First is it's really a distance measure. You take these cells, and for your points, wherever your points are on sort of an XY plane, you do a distance calculation, similar to what you might do with a nearest neighbor clustering. And what's interesting is that that does provide us some insight. If you want to see how that would go out, if we were going to sort of do a tessellation of those points, if you go out in circles till those circles start to intersect, that's how these cells are created. And I think there's some interesting insights that we can glean from that. That distance calculation, for example, if we use probably the most common is a Euclidean distance, what that would mean is that for any given point, wherever you are, if you're in the blue area, then that dot that's in the blue area, that's going to be the closest point to you. If you're in the pink area, then that's going to be the closest point. So wherever you are in that plane, that's the closest distance. The white line here, what the intersection of the two colors is going to be the halfway point, because if you cross over that line to one way, you're closer to one point. If you cross over another, you're closer to the other point. If you put 3 points on there, you sort of have the intersection. That would actually be the centroid of those points. So those 3 points, the centroid, would be the intersection of those 3 colors. So that's a really interesting point about the Voronoi diagrams. So how would we use those? I think if we think about that, we would use them really in mapping, where you go back to, say, the famous John Snow map. Dr. John Snow plotted the outbreaks of cholera in London in the 1800s, and what's interesting is that this really turns itself into a Voronoi diagram. He drew in a later map, he drew this area around where these cholera outbreaks were happening. Each line there is a case of cholera, and the prevailing theory at that time was that this was an airborne disease. Everybody thought that you were catching this from the air. And his theory, from his experience, was this was a waterborne problem. And so he started examining where people were getting their water. He's looking at the various pumps throughout. And what he discovers here, and the hand-drawn area around, is the closest pump to all of those people in sort of that catchment area is the Broad Street pump. So this was really a Voronoi diagram from the beginning. Now, what's fun to do here, and I found a great package. I'll do a shout out to the package called Cholera in R. With simple lines of code, we can do some really fascinating diagrams based on that data that Dr. John Snow collected. We take that, and for example, we can do a Euclidean distance and show where those pumps are related to the instances. But we could also map it with a real Voronoi diagram around it. And we can see the blue dots are the Broad Street pumps. You can see some other cases, and there's some interesting outliers we'll talk about later, maybe in another discussion. But there are a few dots that are outside of those pump areas. But this is the power of, I think, what a Voronoi diagram does. Now, how we use it in mapping is a great viz by George Grzinski, where he mapped the United States of international airports, where you take every major international airport, and that is the custom boundary around it that is the closest to that particular airport. I found that a very interesting case. Here's another one that Alan Walker did just for illustrative purposes. He took Boston coffee, looking at Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, and Pete's Coffee and Tea, and based on where those stores are located, he created a catchment area there where you can kind of see what area they cover. In a real-world application, Alan Walker and Anya Ahern did use Voronoi diagrams and a map here, these cells, to map for the PATH project, visualizing no malaria. And I think this is a great case for this. I mean, this really shows what those areas are. He created a interactive version of it too, or I should say animated version. And here's his animated version looking at the catchment areas where he's calculating the impact of the population served sort of year by year. And you'll see the areas sort of changing as you go along there. One of my favorites as an example of a great Voronoi diagram is done by Ava Murray. She, using Tableau and Exasol, put together a football game, soccer in the US, and each player, you can see the ball kind of moving around the screen. It's the darker dot. but each player on each team is covering an area of the field. And so wherever that player is at that moment in time in space, it's covering that area of the field. And this is really a great way to see this game, throughout the period. Now, this took a lot of work. You can see it was 3 million rows for a full game. This is just 1,000 frames of the game. So a lot of work going into creating this, but I really think it shows how this is useful. And one of my favorites in a Makeover Monday recently, interesting, as I was going down this same path, and Alex Jones published this with this data set, and it's so beautiful, far better than what I was going to create, and it's just well done. He uses Voronoi diagrams to show the different areas of Central Park, that the 3 colors of squirrels, the black, the cinnamon, or the gray squirrel. And you kind of see in this area where there's a really large area, that's a rare squirrel, right? Like the black squirrel doesn't show up very often. One squirrel sighting in, half or a quarter of Central Park there, versus the gray squirrels are all over the place, and you can kind of see them in much smaller zones. So that's interesting to me. I do want to say, where can Voronoi on a map go wrong? It's an arbitrary boundary that you're creating based on the math of a straight point. And you're making a concession there, right? Like, think about a straight line. We're not always moving in straight lines. So, maybe a better way to do it would be to create those areas based on, in the John Snow map, walking, or in a modern day map, maybe driving. That might be a different path that you might take to get from point A to point B. It might not be Euclidean distance. And so there's other ways that you can do this outside of Euclidean distance. This is, sort of a diagram where it has the areas based on how you might walk to the pumps, and you'll see it's a slightly different shape. Now, this is a lot harder to do. You'd have to do an API call for walking or driving distance. So the Voronoi, I think, gives you a lot of power with a really pretty simple calculation. That brings me to my last point, about Voronoi. This is Voronoi on a map. So what happens if we take Voronoi off of a map? I think it still provides usefulness when it's relating to distance. So I'm going to just play a game here with, I'm going to elicit maybe Steve's help here. This is the Iris data set, very famous data set that we use in analytics. And there's 3 species of flowers, and we're measuring their length of their petal and their width of their petal. And so what I'm going to do is create a Voronoi diagram on an XY, a scatter plot. This isn't a map, but it's a scatter plot, right? And so we're going to create a Voronoi diagram on a scatter plot, and then just understanding that we have no mathematical model here other than just calculating distance. There's no predictive model. We didn't run anything fancy here. All we did is put them in their areas. I'm going to say to Steve, if you have a new flower in front of you and it's say 5 1/4 length and 2 width, do you have a guess on which species that might be? What do you think, Steve?
Well, it's a little small for me to see, but I'm going to guess that it's going to be most likely going to be whatever is orange.
Right. And so there is the power, I think, of what this can bring to an analysis, which is just using a simple distance calculation. You've sort of, you can make a prediction here. Now, how accurate that might be, you certainly see areas where it might be less accurate. But I do think there's power in these diagrams. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over and maybe talk about where there might not be power in these diagrams, where we might maybe have a better visualization and kind of debate these a little bit. So the Voronoi tree map is something that we are seeing a lot in the Tableau community. The first viz, I think, that maybe set this off was by Tristan. He did this land of color where he's mapping the amount of land in these areas, the OECD countries. And then he later did a template that you can generate your own. It's a wonderful template that it's really easy to use. You load up a CSV file, hit go, and voila, you get a Voronoi diagram. So I'm going to turn that over to Amanda and kind of let her talk about that.
Thanks, Jeff. So looking at these Voronoi tree maps, when we start looking at the different ones that we see out there in the wild, I think there are ways people have tried to use them as a way to draw people in, which I think is where their value is in some ways novelty and it's eye-catching. So being able to draw people in, for example, on this All the World's Wealth example from LM7, sorry, we don't have a full name there. There's additional information provided along with this Voronoi chart. So you can see the different clustering and groupings that have been defined by color. And then you can see which different continents actually correspond in this bar chart below. So some people, maybe Steve, might argue that maybe this should be a bar chart that then drills down into further segments. But I think in this case, there's some nice labeling, right? They've got nice labels on the segments of high interest that are the largest. There's a rank chart off to the side that gives your actual precise values and a bar chart in the corner. And the question I would ask is, would someone engage with or stop and pause and glance, especially on a Twitter timeline or an infographic, would they stop and glance and even think about this data if it was just a table and a bar chart? The Voronoi gives us something that kind of draws us in. And same Makeover Monday, same week, if we look at this additional example that is also a Voronoi chart, but a little bit different formatting, again, having some clear annotations on the side, partnering the Voronoi with a bar chart, having some clear labeling is helpful for kind of seeing the largest segments. It is not precise. It doesn't give you a precise comparison. It's even harder than your packed circles, Steve, because the shapes are inconsistent and you're not using the same repeating shape over and over. But in some ways, for me, like these remind me a lot of all these different things we see in the wild: stained glass windows, kaleidoscopes, petri dishes of cells from my days back working on bench research in undergrad. And so in some ways, when we have something that draws us in like that, I had a colleague who had these slides up before we started, and she passed by and said, "What is that? That is fascinating and so interesting, and I don't understand it." And she said that without me even saying anything to her or asking her about it or anything like that. So I think for me, that kind of sums up where there's novelty and interest in it, but with a total loss of precision and maybe some misunderstanding on how it's used to interpret it. And we see these done not just in circles. There was someone who just flagged on the chat all about a new one that came up from Nati Bremer today that actually has squares and packs things into squares, which is similar shape. So I'd be curious, any thoughts on whether the novelty is worth the lack of precision?
What do you think, Steve?
Oh, goodness, I'm with the voice of Andy Cotgrave is, well, it depends. Gosh, at times I think I've become the Andy Rooney of data visualization here. Why is it that people feel they need to make fancy diagrams? Back in my day, well, let me kind of sum up my issue. Realize there are two different things here. There's Voronoi tessellation, which is what Jeff discussed, and then these tree map things. And my concern of the tree map things is you may be sabotaging the successful adoption of data visualization in your organization by introducing these things because they titillate, because they look cool. So let me share my screen and give you my take on this.
Well, I think as you flip over, Steve, I think a fascinating question is someone asked about if this looks more like a pie because it's in a circle, or like a circle packing diagram because it's in a circle. So is it easier to understand that it's imprecise if it's a square, which I think is a curious question.
I think it's worse. I think, a pie, it's organized and is using a formulaic, from angle. This I think makes it even harder. And Steve,
but maybe I don't know that that's quite the question. The question there is if it's in a circle versus a square. So like a Voronoi tree map circle versus a Voronoi tree map that's really just a tree map with squares. I mean, I would argue a tree map, at least we can see the squares and the shapes a bit better and make better.
I think I'm going to fail equally at both. And I think, but I've seen people put it, let's do the Voronoi polygons inside these other even odder shapes. I think the generator says you can choose any shape to put this thing in. So if the polygons aren't confusing enough, we'll make it even harder to understand. So briefly, I admit it. I suffer from xenographobia, the fear of foreign chart types. I'm trying to get better about this. And this even goes back to the first time I saw a bullet graph and went, well, what is this nonsense? And then someone took 20 seconds to explain it to me and went, okay, actually, that's really good. And I've gone through this with lots of different things. You know, skepticism. Is this really a good way to show it? Christy Martini and the jump plot. I'm going, well, is this a novelty or is this really useful? So my concern is around the use of these things for common business use. And that's where I want to ask anyone who's using this stuff, what planet do you all live on? I'm spending so much time trying to get organizations just to embrace simple data visualization, to ditch their spreadsheets, and they can't understand some of the simpler chart types. That you live in a world that you can have people that can appreciate and use these other things. Gosh, I'd like to visit that world. So I love Tristan's work, and the generator kicks ass. I just am concerned about, would you ever really want to use this thing? And I used it to create my own example of stuff. So let me take a really simple use case. I've got 3 different values, A, B, and C. How might we show this? And I think I can make an argument that, oh, well, here, take a look at the bar chart. You don't even need color, but I'm using the color because it's going to carry through a little bit. And what can I see from this? Well, I can see that A isn't quite twice as big as B, but it's more than twice as big as C. Super easy to read. Don't even need to have the numbers in there to get that. Here's the use for the pie chart. I can see, without even looking at the number for A, that's half. What can I make of C? C is less than a quarter, a little bit less than a quarter. What can I make of B? It's a little more than a quarter. Instantly, I can see these things. All right? This is hard. People are just terrible at judging the area of circles, and we have a whole, compare the length of the bars, compare the size of the circles, and 82% get the bars right and only 42% get the circles right. So this would get a screaming cat. About a month or 6 weeks ago, I started to see some of these charts out there. I don't even know what I would call this. Is this someone said it's a phases of the moon chart? Is it a diagram of the human eye? Is it a cross-section of Jupiter? But this would definitely get a screaming cat. But I can at least see, okay, the gray segment is 50%. I'm not going to get the other part of this thing. And then finally, we have something like this, which is, and I'm sorry, but this just gets 6 screaming cats in my view. And in my head, I'm hearing Lewis Black railing against this thing. So I'm going to ask the two of you this, and it's not a rhetorical question, but I've been given, sometimes the privilege of doing it with Jeff and Andy, but more often on my own, workshops throughout the world. And what is the number one frustration that workshop attendees indicate that they have? I mean, that if you were to take a bar chart and compare them, which would be the largest bar? What's the number one thing that frustrates people?
I would guess getting people to actually use the things you build or create.
It's within that category, getting people to appreciate the value of data visualization. People are still saying, I just want my spreadsheet, I just want the numbers. And my concern is, if you decide, gee, I want to get people drawn in, and I'm going to do that with this Voronoi illustration, you may draw them in and then you're going to lose them. And I think the best among us, and I am not the best among us, but the can do both. They can create something that really draws people in and keep the analytic integrity. So that's kind of my concern about this.
That's a question Bruce asked. He said his colleague insists that using chart porn graphs, that's what he called them, donuts,
yes,
to get their stakeholders interested. They say that the sexy graphs get interest. And Chris Love actually posted a short video yesterday and kind of talked about, is there something to be said for drawing your audience in? So what do you guys think about that?
Oh, I think one of the things that I find tricky is when there's a parallel demand for, I want novelty and visual interest, but also want it to be analytically insightful and easy to see. I think we'll dig into that a bit more on the long format dashboards too. And I think that sometimes seeing a lot of these different fancy chart types, or chart porn as he calls it, out in the wild, makes people think that that's what they should be asking for. So I worry that we're conditioning stakeholders in some ways to expect that business dashboards have all of these different features and chart porn on them. The annotation I found really interesting on the coffee shop map is it says not for production use, illustration purposes only, which in some ways also speaks to the fact that there's some complexity sometimes in setting up these additional charts that don't work well when you're working with, say, terabytes of data that have to get processed, where speed to analysis when you're looking at segments or filtering graphs and charts actually has to be considered too. We're not just looking at charts themselves in an enterprise environment, we're looking at performance.
That's a great point.
So I can't believe I'm about to quote Edward Tufte, but I'm about to. If your numbers are boring, why don't you get some interesting numbers? If you add some interesting numbers, you might learn something interesting. Mike, if you have to dress the thing up to get people engaged, maybe the thing isn't all that interesting to begin with. Now, granted, I get this. People watch car racing on TV or they go to the track because it's exciting. If you were to say, create a program called Everyday Car Driving, where you're watching people drive at the speed limit, it's not going to engage or get people involved in stuff very much. But I think the best among us can do both. You can draw people in, excitement, whatever it is, and I've got myriad examples of it, not right in front of me that I can conjure, where I'm going to draw you in, but the thing I need you to understand, I'm going to make that as easy as possible for you to understand. So I'm going to attract you, I'm going to draw you in, and I'm going to make my point without confusing you. My fear about a Voronoi thing or some of these crazy demographic dashboards that I'll see people make on survey data is that, yeah, you drew me in, I spent 2 minutes with it, and I didn't really learn anything very valuable. So you just blew it. I'm not coming back again. You just made me spend 2 minutes looking at your shiny object, your viz porn, and I didn't learn anything of great value. I'm not coming back again. Ready to move on, or either of you have a want to go?
We talk for hours on this one.
Yeah, no. And I think a lot of what we have just what comes up with long format dashboards comes up with similar context, Steve. So maybe it's worth pivoting over.
So I was going to rail. I'm not a big fan of these long format dashboards, and then I remembered it was one of the first ones that I saw done in Tableau was Jeff's quantified self long format dashboard, and it in fact made me fall in love with Jeff and go, oh my God, this is so interesting. Jeff is so interesting. He's a fellow musician. I want to connect with him, and we ended up becoming collaborators. Again, I can't help but see things through the world that I live in, and I recognize, well, wait a second, what about data journalism and all these other places? The places that I work, consult for, my clients are almost universally are doing internal business communication or maybe some customer-facing stuff. It's not about data journalism, so please allow me. This is the filter or the prism through which I'm viewing the world. So when I see some of these long-form visualizations, and we're going to be entering Ironvis season, the only place that I see these things, here is Lindsay Poulter's Ironvis submission from last year, The Emotional Valence of Broadway. It is a stunning piece of work, okay? And it is a long-form dashboard. But let me show you a longer-form dashboard. This comes from Hesham Issa. It is brilliant, it is beautiful, the analysis, and then wait a minute, let's go with the 10,000 pixel max from Josh Smith. That's an even longer form dashboard, and it's all three of these people do ridiculously good work, analytic integrity, beautiful design, but the only place I see these things is either in the chart gallery at a Tableau conference or as a feeder for Ironvis, and I've kind of got a couple of these things queued up, and then I'm gonna. So this is Joshua's sumptuous and to some degree sprawling. Jeff and I joked that, he had a 10,000 pixel limit, and didn't somebody tell him that he could hack the XML and expand it if he wanted to? And I just
he said he found out after the fact that he could do that. Yeah, I showed it at a Columbus tug. So if somebody wants to go to 20,000, you can do that.
There you go. And I am maybe there are people out there that, and a lot of people that have a great deal of patience, but I'm questioning someone consuming this way. Now, last year, one of my favorite practitioners, Kevin Flairlich, came up with this scrolly telling approach that was novel to Tableau. Oh, gee, what happened here? Sorry, we need to refresh this. And he's kind of guiding me through this thing. Oh, Napster launched. And then I'll take something in, and it's let me continue reading. And he's using hidden and showing containers very effectively. And now I'll read this next little interesting fact. And I can see I'm 25% through this thing, and then I'll continue reading. And do I see this ever used in business? I haven't. I find this a pretty compelling alternative to story points, and thought this was a really good addition to the craft, and was pretty excited about this particular visualization at the time. But this kind of gets us to a whole discussion of storytelling and the like. And I was in Memphis last week giving a workshop, and was hanging out with Zach Bowders, who is one of the leaders of the tug there. And he had just such a funny quote: the long form submissions for Ironvis, it's like training for the marathon so you can compete in a 40-yard dash. You'll notice no one's making up long form at Ironvis itself. So I think a lot of these things are coming from a popular term within data visualization of storytelling. And I get that you want to tell a story with your data. You want to make a presentation of your data. You found something really useful and insightful, and you want to present that to somebody so they can change their behavior or take action on that. I just question, is the dashboard the best place to tell the story? I think a dashboard's a great place to figure out where the stories are. But to tell the story in the dashboard, I'm not so sure, especially if your data is changing on a weekly basis. How do you create the annotation laters and things like that? This is another thing that I could talk about for hours, but I'm going to pass things over to Amanda and get you to give me your take on this.
Sure thing, Jeff.
Can we all just say "aw"? Everyone's seeing your screen background, and collectively.
Oh, my baby, yes.
Yeah, I think everybody is going, yeah, if you could all type into chat. Aw.
He's darling. He turns 1 next year. He's almost on the same cadence as the Data Viz Society. So let me go ahead and make the case for the fact that I think that the good thing is that I think that there's innovation happening in our field, right? So we see these beautiful scrolly telling pieces, like Bust Out is this example I've got running on my screen right now, by Nadi Bremer, who does brilliant work over on Visual Cinnamon, and who went ahead and created some of these long format scrolly telling pieces that we see in data journalism, which is a good call out, Steve. Like, context matters a lot. Where do I need to see something above the fold versus where do I want to engage with a really rich visual story? And these are the kind of things that we see winning awards, right? She won a bunch of awards for this Visual Cinnamon project, or this project for The Guardian that she did, and well-deserved, right? When we go to, I was at the Information is Beautiful Awards last year, and so inspired by so much of what I saw, and then thought about how my day-to-day work looks more like this. And where you're looking at, how do I go ahead and visualize a lot of data in one place really quickly? By the way,
I think that looks great. I just got to say.
Thank you. Those small multiples area charts with every orange dot is where a community did some meaningful action that made a difference in their health outcome, which is great. So very exciting, great kind of dashboard to build. I'm never going to win an Information is Beautiful award for this kind of work, right? And that's okay. It's not the place, I think, where storytelling and scrollytelling is essential. I do think, though, that it's valuable to think about kind of how we hack the tools that we have to learn and innovate and do new things. So there's these kind of low-code tools that you can start to dabble with that get people excited about data viz. And we all, I think, acknowledge we want to bring more people into our field. There's the code-intensive stuff that if all I could do was develop in D3, I wouldn't be doing my job right now, because I still don't develop data visualizations in D3. It's not my medium. And then there's these kind of happy medium spaces, Tableau being one example, that has an open available platform that lets people play and innovate and try new things. Kind of like the Voronoi charts, right? Trying new things, playing with different media. Some of the things you build there might not be the best fit for a business use case or a client example or consulting, and that kind of data for decision-making environment, but it is a great space to go ahead and practice and try different things. So I think sometimes we kind of hack the tools we have, right? And I think thinking about what our goal is important. And that intersection, like you said, Steve, of storytelling with data art and data journalism with business decision-making, I think is really rare. We usually need to focus on kind of what the primary goal is of what we want to do. And I would offer up this question for debate. So is the issue with long format dashboards that we're calling them dashboards? We had a great topics and biz discussion over on the Data Visualization Society Slack. All around is the dashboard dead? And I think you would both argue as authors of a best-selling book on dashboards that it is not. It is what we build most of the time in our day-to-day work. But some of the comments that came up were around how the word gets used. So we see that companies use this word dashboard to mean anything that has a chart, often in lieu of reports, which seem decidedly less sexy. And really that this is perhaps maybe more something we should celebrate, this idea of a long format dashboard, because it's a feature evolution. Because Tableau and other tools have evolved to let us kind of interact with data as almost an app-like experience, and let those of us who are not heavy coders or low coders find ways to interact with the graphic interface like Tableau's to create innovative visualization, which maybe at some point might filter into us becoming better designers in our day-to-day work. So I would ask, is the question really semantics on what's wrong with the long format dashboard, and what are the other concerns about it? Besides that, maybe my clients now expect that all of those annotations all are automatically generated by Tableau and not typed in text boxes, which is a whole nother conversation we can have about annotation layers that are automatable inside of business dashboards. That's a separate conversation for debate.
So yeah, I do like, the app thing that you're talking about. The features in Tableau are becoming more and more like a web app, and I don't think that changes what the thing about the dashboard becomes. I think it enhances the dashboard. We use dashboard buttons and navigations and drill downs and collapsible containers and things like that that give you like sort of that app feel, but we do it right in the dashboard, right? So it lets you drill down, kind of the things that we talk about with the overview and then filter and details on demand, Ben Schneiderman's, mantra in DataViz. I think it helps you get to that data faster. It helps you declutter your dashboard. And I think that's exciting. The long form reminds me more of a website, right? Like you're going to a website and you're going to read down a news story. You're going to dive into it. It's like sort of a thinking about exploratory versus explanatory. I always see those long forms as more in the explanatory form because there's usually a lot of text that go with it, explaining what I'm looking at, kind of unfolding the story as I move down the page.
Did you ever see any of the Gates Foundation annual letters? They were always built as like a parallax scrolling site. It reminds me kind of that and to your point, Steve, on things that emerge and content that pops up as you move down the page, but totally agree.
Well, I want to amplify one thing, and then we'll move on to our lightning round. You had mentioned the importance of semantics, and Nick DeBaratz, who has kind of taken over the mantle from Stephen Few, and is a practitioner and has a new book coming out called Beyond Dashboards. He presented at the Tableau conference, and I said there are 13 different types of dashboards, and believes that we need to have a clear taxonomy and hierarchy of different types of dashboards, just to manage people's expectations. I suggest people watch this. There's a bunch of stuff I don't agree with. I don't think we need to have a name for these things and people need to have them codified. But he makes a fair point of understanding what this is for and who it's for versus these other type of things. And it may better manage people's expectations. Or you may watch it and go, no, you're wrong, Steve. This guy is completely right. And we do need to make sure everybody understands, what these things are and have a name for them and where they fit in within a hierarchy. But in any case, there are people that are thinking about this, so you don't run into this, well, I was expecting you to make something that looks like this.
Fair point.
Oh, one last thing. I got to say one last thing because Jeff, what you did on the Voronoi stuff, the tessellations, that was amazing. And I'm sure a whole bunch of people are going, holy crap, what an incredible, 5-6 minute treatise on how these things work. I meant to say it when you did it up front. My apologies, Amanda.
Brilliant. So let's hop over into some lightning round. Lightning round today, a couple top of mind things that are on my mind. One is on how we're looking at how we report on and visualize data about COVID-19 and the outbreak that's happening right now and the epidemic that our countries are facing with different levels of severity. This example is one from Singapore. I really like the call out here that it's one of the few charts that I've seen that really looks at patients discharged. So as we have new cases that get confirmed, people are also addressing the disease, treating it. Health workers are doing great, amazing work. And by talking about how many patients have been discharged, we can highlight the fact that we are addressing this health crisis in some ways, avoiding what I think Tariq says nicely is this slightly panic-inducing hockey stick of exponential growth. That seems to be what we keep seeing, where we see cumulative case numbers. And when we looked at this, I thought this was a nice chart. I would love to see more of them plotted so that we really do kind of reinforce that this isn't just a hockey stick of growth. So if we were to, for example, go ahead and stack these together and look at the cumulative case numbers, and then look at whether they're currently in hospital or discharged. Over time, this could have challenges from a reporting perspective on anyone who's readmitted to a hospital or otherwise having additional instances of the disease. But I really appreciate that there's some great groups doing excellent work trying to bring more context around this epidemic and trying to add more than just the number of cases, but really kind of what's the context that's happening, what are decisions being made, what is being published, all those different pieces. So I have a lot of gratitude for a lot of the great journalists out there creating these kind of interactive tools, products, graphs that help us understand what's happening, but without inducing panic around something that in the US right now, I really am more worried as a former public health professional about flu for my son than I am about COVID-19. So not to minimize what the severity is for other countries, but I think that we need to be mindful of how our visualizations evoke those kind of emotional responses. Steve, over to you.
Just comment on that. You know, the New York Times did something about the spread of the coronavirus, and they used a logarithmic scale. Did you, you know, and there was a whole discussion, you know, kind of the Twitterverse went nuts over, was this appropriate, was it misleading, etc. So we can save that for another time. Amanda, do you have my slide in there, or do I need to do a quick?
There you go.
Okay, so very briefly, Ben Jones, formerly the head of Tableau Public, now runs dataliteracy.com. Wiley published his latest book, I think last November, December, and I cannot recommend it enough. We live in the era of the citizen data scientists, where mere mortals are getting the ability to interrogate data, find insights, and share it with others. And if you think there are problems with people possibly misusing chart types, what happens if the data is corrupt? What happens if the data is missing? What happens if you don't understand how the data was gathered? You don't understand where certain measures are appropriate, where an average or a median may not make sense. And Ben does a really wonderful job walking people through this. One of my favorite presentations is in our workshop that we do is thinking critically about data, and Jeff put this together, and this is an expansion on that Ben wants to preserve all the good that can happen from this and prevent the bad, and it could be catastrophic bad. If the data is bad and flawed, any visualization isn't going to be good. So highly recommend this.
Excellent. Jeff, what I don't have is John Snow in here. Do you want to pull up John Snow real quick?
Yeah, I can do that. I was just going to, you know, sort of echo the idea of thinking critically. Can you see my screen?
Can, yes.
You know, what's interesting about the John Snow story when we talk about thinking critically, you know, he went house to house. He was a doctor in the area. He lived down, you know, sort of toward P13, a little to the right of P13 was his house right there. He lived in that area. He knew that area. He actually mapped this in his head when he was doing this, not on paper, and then later mapped it out. But the outliers, you know, if you look at P12, you know, there's a red dot over there where there's a case, and the closest pump would be P12. Like you would go to pump 12, not up to pump 7. You know, one of the interesting things is that that the water was reported to be sweeter at the Broad Street pump up at pump 7. So people would walk an extra block or two to go to that water because they liked the taste better. There's also some interesting stories about where there were no cases. You know, the missing data is important sometimes, and there were no cases of cholera in this big area in the middle of the map. There was the poorest of the poor worked in this big rectangle, and there weren't that many cases. That's because they had their own water pump. And there was no cases in the rectangle over here because that was a brewery, and people were drinking beer instead of water. And you could say, you know, beer saves lives, I guess. But the point is that knowing the data, getting into the data, knowing the outliers, knowing the missing data really is important. And even in a story as famous as this, those outliers are really part of that story. The missing data is part of that story.
Thanks, Jeff.
So do we want to take some Q&A or
Questions?
or do we want to show 3D printing of data?
Let me just show it so people can then click on the cool link really quickly, because I feel like we held this out last time, and I want to give a shout out to this. You can all see my darling son all over again.
You got a lot of awes in the in the chat window. By the way, I
thought this was really cool. I will show a link. I will post a link. You can explore this on your own. But there was a company that did these 3D printing of visualizations going into an annual report for a client. And then they hung little people off of them and all those pieces. But the cool thing about this isn't as much, I think, the photos, which is fun, but the idea of creating these very precise but tactile ways to interact with data and data visualization. So for people who maybe have different issues with their vision or otherwise can't see the precision on some of our charts and graphs, the idea of creating something that someone can feel is a really neat concept. So I'll throw a link up in the chat. Would highly encourage folks to take a peek at it.
And let me just share.
I think
and then we'll take some questions. But the recording of this and all other chart chats are available at bigbookofdashboards.com. So if you missed this or you want to share it with others, you can find it there. And of course, I'm going to plug some upcoming workshops. So there's the information there. Hope you'll be able to join us for one of them. And let's open this up to some Q&A. I know we went a little bit long, but it was fun.
I mean, the one for Bruce that we had about if Tableau Public tends to pick sexy vizzes over practical ones for viz of the day, how is that selection and that recognition influencing our culture and what we build?
You know, that's been a topic for a long time, and I think under Ben Jones, they started to make an effort to pick things for different reasons. And I know recently, this last year, the Tableau team has really done a great job to try to pick a variety of things. So sometimes I think they're picked for different reasons, not always just to be eye-catching or just to show off, what Tableau can do. Sometimes it showcases a new feature. Sometimes it's a great story. Sometimes I see a viz and, without a doubt, I know that viz is going to be viz of the day because it's just a great visualization.
I think they've gotten much better, by the way, that or I've become numb to the things that annoy me about it. But sometimes I will question because it's look at this thing that everybody's tweeting about. And should I be making that? I guess I should be, because this got viz of the day, or people were retweeting it, or it got 452 likes. It can be problematic.
Fernando asked about, I think it was Amanda's slide where she had the coding versus the tool versus Excel, and Fernando asked about R. I think that was just a few examples that Amanda put up there. That wasn't that wasn't an encyclopedia of all the tools by any means. So I think R, we'd probably all agree, R is probably on the D3 side of coding, has very powerful plotting packages. And Python, R and Python probably sit over on the D3 side. So yeah, we weren't trying to hit all the tools, Fernando. We're just I think she was just splitting them up.
No, I do believe I put a thing at the bottom that said plot for illustration purposes only, incomplete and imprecise. But yes.
We have about 5 of 100, right?
Yeah, I mean, the tool library out there is just crazy nowadays. But I think it's great because it creates a space for almost anyone who wants to enter into visualization. I mean, on my team, I've got full stack software developers who've now specialized in and do custom data viz. And I have people who came from a research and analytics background who never thought they'd be working with data viz every single day of their lives, and now that's their job and they love it. So.
Let's see, do we have anything else here? People are dividing between the Q&A and will I come to DC, Steve? Yes, I had a great workshop there, one with Jeff a few years ago and one last year. Would love to come back again.
Yeah, you've been there twice, right?
Yeah. I have, and we'll be there for some not public stuff, but we'll be there in March and April.
Yeah, I think Amanda's audio did get choppy there toward the end, but thankfully, yeah, we were able to hear her.
All right, so next time around, hopefully Andy will be joining us. And with luck, maybe we'll even get a schedule and know when we're going to be doing this in March and April and May.
That would make Amanda very happy, I think.
I love schedules a lot.
I think that's probably the best reason for doing it. There are a lot of very good reasons. And Amanda, congratulations to you and your colleagues for the incredible success with the Data Visualization Society. Jeff, always a delight. Thanks everyone for joining us. And hey, I see Tristan there, the
it's all your fault, Tristan.
The creator of the evil tool.
Tristan, I hope I did justice to the fact that there is a place and a time in the novelty space for that package that you've created. Bruce, you asked a great question. How do we join the DVS? You can go to datavisualizationsociety.com, and which I'm posting a link in right now. And I would love to have anyone interested to go ahead and join that organization. It is free and open to join, lots of great resources. Come say hi to me on Slack if you come join DVS.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.